Thanksgiving night was colder than anyone expected, the kind of cold that carried loneliness through the wind like a whisper. Emily held her two kids close as they walked along the dim country road, their breath turning to white fog in the air. She had left everything behind, her home, her abusive ex, the life that kept her trapped. She only carried a backpack, a blanket for the kids, and a desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, someone would help them. But the town was dark, silent, doors locked, lights out. Every step felt heavier, but she kept moving, telling her children they would find a warm place soon, even though she had no idea where they were going or how much farther they could walk in the freezing night. Her son, Liam, tugged her hand and whispered that his feet were hurting, while little Ava shivered against her shoulder. Emily's heart cracked hearing their small voices tremble. She wished she could be strong enough to pretend everything was okay, but her tears quietly fell as she looked up at the starless sky. She had called shelters earlier, but they were full. She had knocked on strangers' doors, but no one answered. The world felt too big, too uncaring, and for the first time in months, she feared she had made the wrong choice by leaving. Then, in the distance, she saw a dim light glowing from a ranch house standing alone in the open field. It looked old but lived in, warm compared to the cold emptiness around them. Emily hesitated at first. What if they were turned away again? What if the owner wasn't kind? But the wind pushed them forward, urging her to try one last time. The gravel crunched under their feet as they walked up the long driveway. The house stood tall, with soft yellow lights glowing from the windows, flickering like a silent invitation. Emily lifted her hand to knock, but her fingers were so numb that she could barely feel the wood. As the door creaked open, she stepped back in fear, clutching her kids tightly. A tall man stood in the doorway, a wool blanket wrapped around his shoulders, surprise softening his face when he saw them shivering under the porch light. The rancher, Ethan, didn't speak at first, studying the exhausted mother and her children with gentle concern. His Thanksgiving dinner still sat untouched on the table behind him, candles melting low. He asked softly, "Are you all right?" The question was simple, but it hit Emily so hard she almost collapsed. She tried to speak, but her voice broke into a sob. Liam hid behind her leg, and Ava clung to her coat. Ethan didn't ask another question. Instead, he opened the door wider and said, "Come inside. Please. You're freezing." Something inside Emily finally cracked. She nodded, stepping into the warmth that felt almost unreal, like walking into a dream she didn't deserve. The sudden heat made her dizzy. Her legs trembled as Ethan guided her to the couch and wrapped a thick blanket around all three of them. He moved carefully, as if afraid to scare them. The kids' eyes slowly widened when they saw the fireplace crackling, sending sparks of orange light across the room. Ethan walked to the kitchen and returned with steaming cups of cocoa for the children and warm tea for Emily. She tried to thank him, but the words tangled in her throat. Ethan simply nodded and said, "No need. Nobody should be out in weather like this." Emily's chest tightened. It had been so long since someone cared without expecting anything in return. After a few minutes, Ethan sat across from them, not too close, just enough to show he was there if needed. Emily explained her situation slowly, with breaks in between, her hands shaking as she recounted the months of fear, the night she finally escaped, and the hopelessness that followed. Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He listened, his eyes clouding with empathy. When she finished, he exhaled deeply and said, "You're safe here. As long as you need." Emily stared at him, stunned. No one had ever offered her safety, not like this, not without hesitation. She didn't know whether to cry or breathe. The night deepened outside, snow beginning to fall in slow white flakes, but inside the ranch house, the air felt warm for the first time in Emily's life. Ethan brought out extra pillows and blankets, insisting they sleep in the guest room instead of the couch. Emily refused at first, worried about burdening him, but he shook his head firmly. "You're not a burden. You're a guest," he said with a tone that allowed no argument. The kids settled into the soft bed instantly, their small bodies melting into comfort they hadn't felt in months. When Emily tucked them in, she paused, watching their peaceful faces, realizing they finally looked like children again, not frightened survivors. That alone made her eyes well up. Emily stepped out of the room, closing the door gently. She found Ethan standing in the hallway, arms crossed loosely, as if making sure they were truly okay. "They'll sleep well tonight," he said softly. "You too, I hope." But Emily shook her head, confessing she hadn't truly slept in months. Ethan nodded with understanding and led her to the living room where the fireplace cast long shadows across the walls. They sat quietly, listening to the crackling wood. For the first time, Emily didn't feel the need to fill the silence. Ethan's presence was comforting in a way that didn't demand anything from her. It felt safe, strangely familiar, as if they had known each other long before this night. As she sipped the warm tea, Ethan finally shared a piece of his own story, how he lost his wife 3 years ago, how the house had been filled with silence ever since, and how Thanksgiving had become the loneliest day of his year. "I thought I was meant to live alone forever," he admitted quietly. "But when I opened that door tonight, something told me this wasn't an accident." Emily's breath caught. She wasn't used to being wanted, not even in a purely human sense. There was a gentleness in Ethan's eyes that felt like a lifeline. But she quickly looked away, afraid to let herself hope for anything more than survival. Ethan could sense her fear, so he didn't push. Instead, he simply said, "Whatever you need, whatever pace feels right, this house is open to you." Emily nodded, her throat tight with gratitude she didn't know how to express. When she finally lay down on the guest bed, she expected her mind to fight sleep, but the warmth of the blankets and the distant sound of the fireplace lulled her into the deepest rest she had had in years. For once, she didn't dream of running or hiding. She dreamt of peace, of a quiet morning, of safety. Ethan sat in the living room for a long time afterward, staring into the fire, wondering why letting strangers in felt more like fate than charity. Morning came with golden light filtering through the curtains, followed by the smell of pancakes drifting through the hallway. Emily woke up startled at first, but her fear faded when she heard her children laughing, true laughter, not forced or frightened. She walked into the kitchen to find Ethan flipping pancakes while Liam and Ava played with a small barn cat on the floor. "Good morning," Ethan said with a warm smile, as if her presence in his kitchen was the most natural thing in the world. Emily's chest filled with something unfamiliar, comfort. She sat down, and for the first time in a long time, she ate breakfast without feeling sick from anxiety. After breakfast, Ethan offered to show the kids around the ranch. Emily hesitated, worried they might interfere with his work, but Ethan waved off her concerns. The children ran outside, marveling at the horses, the open fields, the crisp morning air. Ethan walked beside Emily, explaining how he had been running the ranch alone since his wife passed. "It gets quiet," he said with a half smile. "Too quiet sometimes." Emily understood that silence all too well. As the kids fed the horses with Ethan's help, Emily noticed something surprising. Her children were smiling without fear, without looking over their shoulders. And she felt her own heart soften at the sight of Ethan kneeling beside them, patient and gentle. But peace rarely lasts without a test. That afternoon, as Emily helped Ethan with chores, a truck pulled up near the driveway. Her heart froze when she recognized the familiar shape of the vehicle. Her ex. Somehow he had tracked her. Panic surged through her body so violently she couldn't breathe. Ethan immediately sensed her terror. "Stay behind me," he said quietly but with unmistakable strength. Her ex stormed out, shouting accusations, demanding she return. Ethan didn't yell back. He simply stood tall, blocking the man's path. "They're not going anywhere with you," Ethan warned, voice steady as steel. "You need to leave." Emily shook as memories crashed over her, but she wasn't alone this time. Her ex lunged forward, but Ethan didn't move. Instead, he calmly informed him that the sheriff lived only 10 minutes away and that he had every right to report trespassing and harassment. The threat of real consequence finally made the man falter. After a tense moment, he spat a curse and drove away in frustration. When the truck disappeared down the road, Emily collapsed into tears, trembling from a fear she had held for years. Ethan didn't touch her at first. He waited until she nodded, then wrapped his arms around her gently. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I'm not letting anyone hurt you ever again." Emily clung to him, realizing this man wasn't just a stranger who opened his door, he was someone who opened his heart too. That night, after the kids fell asleep early from all the excitement, Emily sat alone on the porch, watching the last of the sunset fade behind the hills. She felt something she hadn't felt in forever, calm. Ethan joined her quietly, handing her a warm cup of cider. They sat side by side, shoulders nearly touching but not quite. There was a softness in the air, a question forming silently between them. Emily finally spoke, her voice fragile yet honest. "Why did you help us?" Ethan looked at her with a gentle seriousness. "Because sometimes life brings people to your door for a reason. And because no one deserves to be alone on Thanksgiving night, especially someone as strong as you." Emily felt her chest warm at his words. Strength, she had never seen herself that way. For years she felt small, invisible, trapped in survival mode. But Ethan made her feel seen, respected, valued. She laid her hands on the railing, watching snowflakes settle on her skin. "I don't know if I'm ready for anything new," she admitted softly. Ethan nodded. "You don't have to be. Healing takes time." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But I'll be here. Whether that means giving you space or standing right beside you. Whatever you need." Emily felt tears pool in her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain, they were from relief. In the days that followed, Emily and her kids settled into the ranch like it was a world designed for recovery. Liam learned how to help Ethan with simple ranch tasks, proudly carrying tools and feeding the chickens. Ava followed Ethan everywhere like a small shadow, giggling whenever he lifted her onto a horse. Emily spent her mornings cooking meals and her afternoons sitting by the fire, slowly remembering what peace felt like. Ethan never pushed for anything deeper, he simply supported her, offering consistent kindness that asked for nothing in return. And slowly, Emily found herself smiling more than she cried, laughing more than she feared, living more than she survived. One evening, about 2 weeks later, Emily found Ethan repairing a broken fence at sunset. She walked toward him, her heart unexpectedly nervous. "You've done so much for us," she began. Ethan stood up, brushing dust from his hands. "I didn't do anything special." Emily stepped closer. "You gave us safety, a home, a chance to breathe again." Ethan's expression softened, but he shook his head. "You did the hardest part. You left. You protected your kids. You fought your way here." Emily looked at him then, really looked, and saw a man who carried his own quiet grief yet still chose to help others anyway. Maybe he needed them as much as they needed him. The moment stretched between them, warm and delicate. Emily reached out, gently touching his hand. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak, he simply let her hold it, as if acknowledging that she was finally ready to trust again. The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and deep rose. Ethan squeezed her hand softly, almost shyly. "I'm glad you knocked on my door that night," he said. Emily smiled, eyes glistening. "I'm glad you opened it. It wasn't a declaration of love. Not yet, but it was the beginning of something real, something built on safety, time, and shared healing." On the third weekend, the town held a small winter festival. Emily hesitated, wary of crowds, but Ethan encouraged her gently. "You're not alone anymore," he reminded her. She took a deep breath and agreed. Liam and Ava raced ahead to the stalls, laughing with other kids, their fear finally broken. Emily stayed close beside Ethan as they walked through the warm lights and soft music. Some people stared, curious about the new family at the ranch, but Ethan didn't let go of her hand. "Ignore them," he said. "You're with me." Emily felt a spark of courage she didn't know she still had. For the first time, she didn't care who watched. When they returned to the ranch that night, the fireplace glowed softly, waiting for them like a memory of everything they had survived together. Emily tucked the children into bed, kissed their foreheads, and stepped into the living room where Ethan stood by the fire. She walked over slowly, stopping just a breath away from him. "This feels like home," she whispered. Ethan turned toward her, his eyes warm. "That's because it is," he said softly. Emily felt something shift inside her, a final piece of fear loosening its grip. She realized she wasn't just healing here, she was beginning again. Ethan lifted a hand, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle and careful. "Emily," he said quietly, "I don't ever want you to feel pressured, but, if you ever want this place to be your home permanently, the door will always stay open." Emily's breath hitched. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a request. It was an invitation to a life she never imagined she deserved. "I need time," she admitted. Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Then take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Emily smiled softly, touched by his patience. For once, her future didn't feel frightening, it felt possible. Weeks turned into a month, and snow blanketed the ranch in quiet beauty. Christmas lights glowed around the porch, strung carefully by Ethan and the kids. Emily watched them from the doorway, her heart swelling at the sight of the man who had become their anchor. She felt something settle inside her, a peaceful certainty. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Emily approached Ethan by the fire, her hands trembling not from fear, but from choice. "I think," she whispered, "we're ready to stay. If you still want us here." Ethan's expression softened into something warm and overflowing with relief. "There's no place I'd rather have you," he said. Emily felt tears rise, but this time they carried joy, not pain. She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around Ethan for the first time without hesitation. He held her carefully, as though she was something precious, something that needed to be protected and cherished. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Ethan pressed his forehead gently against hers. "You saved me too," he murmured. "You brought life back into this house." Emily felt her heart settle into its new place, safe, steady, loved. A soft snow drifted outside as Emily and Ethan stood together, the warmth of the fire wrapping around them like a promise. They didn't need grand declarations. They didn't need perfect words. Their quiet closeness said everything. Emily rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of a heart that matched hers in quiet rhythm. She realized her life no longer revolved around fear. It revolved around healing, hope, and the simple, steady presence of a man who opened his door on a cold Thanksgiving night and changed everything. As the days passed, Emily and Ethan built a life shaped by small, gentle moments, morning breakfasts, shared chores, laughter echoing across the barn. Liam and Ava thrived, confident and carefree for the first time in their young lives. Emily found strength she thought she had lost forever, and Ethan rediscovered the warmth of companionship. Their home became a sanctuary not just for survival, but for growth. And every night, as they tucked the kids into bed and watched the fire crackle, Emily felt gratitude deeper than words could express. Spring eventually melted the snow, revealing wide green fields that shimmered under the sun. One afternoon, Ethan surprised Emily by showing her a small garden plot he had prepared behind the house. "I thought you might like your own space here," he said shyly. Emily touched the soil, feeling the warmth of the earth beneath her fingers. It wasn't just a garden, it was a symbol of new beginnings. She turned to Ethan, her smile soft and full of meaning. "This is perfect," she whispered. Ethan stepped closer, lifting her hand and kissing it gently. "So are you." Months after that cold Thanksgiving night, Emily stood on the ranch porch watching her children play while Ethan repaired the fence nearby, humming softly. She felt peace settle into her bones, a peace she once believed she would never experience. She walked toward Ethan, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Thank you for opening your door," she whispered. Ethan turned, pulling her gently into his arms. "Thank you for walking toward it," he replied. And in that moment, surrounded by the life they built from broken pieces, Emily finally understood. Sometimes the darkest nights lead you to the warmest homes, and the kindest hearts.